Joe, speaking of offense, we got to go down back again for a second straight episode to the state of Iowa. Arguably the best offense of all time is returning in the Iowa Hawkeyes. Obviously, a lot of sarcasm here.
Yeah.
But as we continue on these deep dives, your thoughts on the Iowa Hawkeyes going into the season?
Yeah, one more quick jab. Their biggest portal loss that they had was Caden Proctor, which still remains one of the most hilarious, ridiculous things that has ever happened and might never be replicated because of how ridiculous it was. But here's one thing that really stood out to me as I was putting my notes together on them. They have probably one of the most underrated offensive line units coming back. And I know that they stunk moving the football. Like they were horrendous. A lot of that should have gone on Ferentz's shoulders, who was the OC last year, and he's gone. I just think that defensively, they bring back a lot. They lost Cooper DeJean, but a lot of those important guys are coming back, like Jay Higgins, like Nick Johnson. They've got a very formidable linebacking duo. Yaya Black is a really dynamic athlete at defensive tackle. There's a lot of surprising names. Sebastian Castro is another one. Surprising names on that defense that could maybe be All-Americans. That at the end of the year, we're like, who? This guy was an All-American? Who was he? What did he do? And you pull up his stats, and he's got like 120 plus tackles. That's who Jay Higgins is in this scenario. I think they're good enough defensively with a really weak schedule to be at the top of the conference at the end of the year, and they get their doors blown off if they somehow sneak their way into the Big Ten championship game because they have benefited from an easy schedule. But all I'm trying to say offensively, the floor is so goddamn low, and if Cade McNamara is healthy, if they can just be a little bit better, they'll be I don't want to say competent, a competitive team in the Big Ten this year.
Why do you think that they are under win total is at 7.5?
I just think it's easy to throw that number out there for the sports books.
Easy? I mean, Joe,
they were pretty bad last year.
You think that they can get to 10 wins, then that's a pretty big miss by Vegas, who doesn't normally miss.
I mean they miss plenty. They win against the average person who doesn't know ball.
I mean, they win about 60% of the time. I don't want to say that's average.
Not against me. I mean, I would take the over on that win. Pull up their schedule. Seriously, this all comes down to their schedule. That's the weirdest part about they don't have receivers. Like we can get ahead of that. We can like completely avoid, but jump to that. That's the important part here is I don't know how they throw the ball. I don't know how they move the ball through the air.
Yeah, I don't know how they move the ball at all. Well, I'll go to the defense in a minute. Joe, the thing is that I do think that they had a chance when Ferentz stepped away, that they had a chance to come into the 21st century. Okay? They did not. And you can't get worse than you were a year ago offensively. Joe, they can't. I mean, it's like, could they? Yes, but is the probability of that is very low. Right? Very low that they can get worse. The thing for me is, Joe, when I look at them, I think that as much as that fan base doesn't want to admit it, I'm going to give you the ultimate. People just said in the comments earlier in the show that I have a lot of hot takes. Here's one. You got to move on from Kirk Ferentz.
Yeah.
You're going to have to move on because – what are you trying to accomplish? What are your goals and what are you trying to do? Like, do you just want to be an okay, pretty decent football team?
I would argue that for them to be as consistently like 9-3 as they've been is over exceeding the general expectations. Because like when is the last time?
Where do you progress? Because are you just going to sit there and allow Joe? They could.
You think that they could turn into a national championship team?
No, I don't know about all that. But are you just going to say the same thing every single year? Joe, imagine being a fan of the Iowa Hawkeyes and going into every game not knowing if you could get past the 50.
But it's just okay. That's a good point.
Okay, so I mean, like at some point, like if this happened at Notre Dame, if this happened at Ohio State, Bama, Georgia, LSU. And I know that those fan bases are not like that anywhere. Like they're not like that. But there just comes a point where I think that you had the writing is on the wall here. Look, Joe, I don't disagree with you. I think there's going to be a lot of the same stuff that happens with them every single year. but I do look at their schedule as an example. I do think they're going to be good defensively. But, Joe, you got Iowa State that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, but we're not worried about Iowa State. We talked about how we're not really.
I would be. Can I tell you why?
Why? I don't.
Joe, we talked about the Iowa State and them having a quarterback that's returning. We talked about the receivers that they have on the outside returning. Joe, if God forbid if they score 21 to 28 points, can Iowa, of all teams, match that?
I don't, but this is what it comes down to. I think that Iowa is built much more physically along their offensive and defensive lines that it's not going to come down to that. I don't think that there's going to be a scenario where I think that as they have done in the past, they bring a lot of people down to their level and they really, really drag them down offensively. And why I say that their offensive floor it doesn't take much for them to be a little bit better. That's a game that they win. I really don't think that Iowa State matches up very well with Iowa, considering all these defensive playmakers that they have coming back.
Joe, you can defend the defensive side of the football all you want. When you can't get past the 50, it doesn't matter. Joe, yards mean nothing if you can't score points. I mean, it doesn't matter. Joe, there's 5 games on this schedule that I say that I think that there's enough offensive firepower against and these opponents that they play that God forbid one time that they're not of the defensive echelon that they have been, that if they can't move the football, Joe, they're the wildest team in the country in reference to they could be a 7-5 team. They can win 10 games.
I don't disagree with that part. And that was the problem last year is that there were a couple of times where they either almost lost or they did lose games that they shouldn't have because their offense completely was non-existent.
It doesn't miss upon me either. It doesn't miss upon me either that Northwestern was not a bad team last year.
Okay, I feel like you're kind of just picking ways that we can. I really think that they're better than you're giving them credit for. They're bringing back most of their defense. Most of it. The only guy who's not coming back is Cooper DeJean, and he was unavailable for the back half of the schedule because he got hurt. Most of their offensive line.
So okay. They were 130th in total offense a year ago. Do you see them being in the top 75?
No, but this is my whole point, is that last year they stunk offensively, and we joked about them, and they played in the Big Ten championship game because of the divisions. I'm not saying they're getting to the Big Ten championship game this year, but why should we feel surprised that they're going to be little bit better offensively?
Like Ohio State, Washington. I know you're going to
one good team here.
Huh?
You're naming one tough team here. Well, Ohio State's they don't play Michigan, Penn State, Oregon, or USC next year.
Okay, well, can I finish my point before you rudely interrupt like a Rudy poo?
Okay.
Do you think Washington offensively is not going to be good enough that they can score at least 4 touchdowns on them?
We did the preview. I don't know. I don't think that they're a bigger question mark for me.
Joe,
we're replacing most of their offensive line.
We're talking about 3 to 4 touchdowns. Will Rogers can give you 3 touchdowns against this team, and
I think it's an over assumption.
All right. I don't understand the logic in the thought process and reasoning that if you can't score points and they're still 130, Joe, God forbid they don't get out of the hundreds.
Okay, but Blake, the context of why they were terrible offensively was because they had a bad Nepo situation at offensive coordinator who didn't know how to call plays. It was one of the worst play calling decision makings that I've ever seen.
Are we 100% sure that it was Ferentz or is it personnel?
It was a horrible mix of both things, but more importantly, they were playing a backup quarterback who is not a competent Power 5 starter. Cade McNamara was not available at all.
And are you 100% sure that he'd be available and stays healthy throughout the season? There are what ifs. I could play the what if game with you all year. But again, I feel like today's episode is, Joe, what were they last year? Okay, dead last. What can they progress to be better?
That's the point. They were dead last. Do you know how easy it is to not be dead last? Bringing back a 6th-year quarterback? And Luke Lakey, who was unavailable at tight end, who's one of the more underrated tight ends in the country.
So they lost to Minnesota a year ago. Like we're acting like. Hold on one second. Let me finish this point. Oh, okay. Hold on. Let me finish this point. But Joe, they legitimately couldn't beat teams like Minnesota last year.
Can I ask you this question?
Sure.
How did they get to the Big Ten championship game?
Because I have no idea. I really don't. Because
that's my point. That's my point. Is that it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. And they bring back that whole defense in order for them to.
Okay, let me ask you a question. Are you 1,000% sure that teams like Nebraska haven't got better that's on their schedule? They lost to Illinois a year ago by 2. They beat Illinois last year by 2 points. They beat Northwestern by 3 points. I understand that you're talking about their defense and how good they are. That's fair. But they play better offensive teams this year than they did a season ago. Joe, there's a reason that their over under win total is 7.5. You want to know why? Because I don't think I think that there are a lot of people that think that, okay, these games that you won at home that were close, can you now go on the road? Do you slip up in some of those? That's all that I'm trying to say. Joe, I don't think that you're going to be better defensively than you were a year ago.
Why wouldn't they be? They're bringing back most of that starting defense.
Most is not all. Joe, let's be realistic. When you lose to Minnesota a year ago, you beat Northwestern by 3, who, by the way, Northwestern, as an example last year, was in ultimate chaos with the Fitzy firing. Ultimate chaos. Joe, they barely got past the 50-yard line, and you're starting to ask me the question, if that can't happen at Washington. Like, let me paint a scenario for you for just a second. I get Cade McNamara is back. Joe, they barely got past the 50-yard line against Northwestern, and you want me to come in here and say, oh, Will Rogers can't put up points against them.
I just think that
Jed Fish can't scheme something up to put points up against them.
You're practically assuming, and why I really don't, like, I'm really against what you're trying to say here. You're practically assuming that they're not going to be much better offensively.
No, they're not.
It requires such they managed to get as far as they did with probably one of the worst offenses we've ever seen in college football.
Okay, that's fair. That is very hyperbolic. Will they be better than 130th in the country? Sure.
If they're able to win games last year the way that they did, with the 130th offense in the country and one of the most historically worst joke of an offense that we have ever seen in the sport. I've never seen an offense that's been made fun of this much. If they were able to accomplish that, what does that mean for them for this upcoming year? That's what I'm trying to say. And if it's slightly better and Cade McNamara can connect with Lakey, and if maybe one, I don't think that they're going to have any receivers. I'm not saying he's going to throw for 3,000 yards. He's probably going to go under that. He's probably going to throw for less than 20 passing touchdowns. But if they could win games last year with guys that should not have been on that field, and that probably a lot of guys that won't get starts on any other Power 5 roster, it's not going to be hard for them to get a little bit better.
You're assuming one way where I'm assuming the other.
But okay, when the gap of assumption here is there's only like a sliver of room for them to go backwards.
There, I said it. I think they're 8-4.
If they did better than that last year, I just think that 8-4 is 9-3.
I think they play better teams this year than they did a year ago. I think
I disagree though. I think that their schedule.
Joe, do you really think Nebraska didn't get better?
I think that they did, but I also don't. Like their offensive line. How do they? Their offensive line was inconsistent.
Joe, they had a decent offensive line a year ago and got patty smacked. They couldn't run the football.
I can't get behind this. When they beat a team, when they at the end of the season, we're sitting there looking at the standings and we go, how the hell did Iowa finish 5th? BetOnline remains your top spot for all of your live betting action and contests. NFL, college football, UFC, NHL are all in full swing. BetOnline is your number one source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions with both desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% off your first deposit. That is a 50% welcome bonus. BetOnline,
where the game starts.